Hello all, this is Chandrasekhar Girajala studying Masters in IT Project Management in Stockholm University. Today I am here to describe you a few things about project management methodologies, and before we go into our lecture, let's look into the outline. This presentation outlines what is project, what is project management, what is project management methodologies, and what are the different types of project methodologies like sequential, agile, and we also going to look into DevOps. And after that we'll try to see what is the best project management methodologies where a project can use. And then I have embedded some few references which I have gone through while preparing this presentation or lecture. What is a project? According to Project Management Institute, the term project refers to any temporary endeavor with a definite beginning and end. In simple terms, a project is defined as a sequence of tasks that must be completed to attain a certain outcome, and the projects have a specific start and end dates, and also the project has a certain boundaries to execute. We can say, like, when you are have an existing product, and if you want to make into a much more better project, and even the process of moving from old state to new state, we also can say like we are doing some project activities there. And projects are quite complex, which means like it involves a lot of team members efforts to complete, and there is a lot of planning and monitoring is required. And in this case, like, we will see who is going to manage these projects and what is the role of the person who is going to manage this project as well. If we move into our next slide, what is project management? As we discussed, like, projects are quite complex and they are like multi-faceted, and that means like it requires lots of planning and organizing. We have some managers to look into the project progress, and that is nothing but project management. Project management is the process of leading the work of a team to achieve all project goals within the given constraints. In simple to say, like, they try to do these planning, organizing, and they try to see which is best for the team completion of the project, and they try to do some decision makings for the project to be done in time within the allocated budget. And in the process, the first decision they need to do is like what project management methodologies they should select, and that is in our next slide. What is project management methodologies? As I mentioned, a project management methodology is essentially a set of guiding principles and processes for managing a project, which means we have a project in hand and the project manager knows like when it needs to be done, and then he needs to make sure like it goes in the given time constraints. And to do that, he needs to set some guidelines, like some principles while managing that project. So this is the first step, like as a project manager will be doing, like setting some kind of guiding principles, like some rules, like what to do and what not to do. And there are like different types of project management methodologies. We will look into different kind of project methodologies in our next slide. In project management methodologies, there are like different types. One is sequential and the other is agile. And in agile we have two kind of like different frameworks. One is Scrum and the other is Kanban. So sequential is something like a traditional kind of project methodology, and the agile is the kind of a modern one where many companies are trying to adapt to their organization culture. Right now in the current world, if you see, like, many organizations that are trying to make sure like they follow this agile project methodology more when compared to sequential. There is nothing wrong in sequential, but considering the fast-paced growth of technologies, like there is kind of fast-paced culture, and everyone wants to be first in the market. So in the given scenarios, many organizations are now trying to go into this agile type of work model. We will look into these in details in the coming slides, like what is sequential model and which models it is, and then we'll go into the agile models as well. Yeah. Coming to sequential model now. Sequential model, in this we have waterfall model, which is like a traditional approach. It has like different stages where the project goes into. One is requirements, design, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. In these different steps, the process of workflow is sequential. That is, only after completion of requirements phase, then design phase will be starting, and once after completion of design state, development state will be starting. So it's like this, like the output of first phase will be the input for the next phase, which means that design phase should wait to start its activities until unless the requirement phase is done. Similarly, when it comes to deployment as well, only after completion of testing activities, then deployment phase will be started, which means like every step depends upon the previous step, and if one thing goes wrong in one of the steps, then the other steps will be affected. So in this part, the planning, the main focus for the project manager is to plan the activities in a correct way, so that the project doesn't go in the other way, which means that when we are gathering the requirements in the first phase of this model, those should be like the 100% correct, and those requirements should actually support the what we want to do basically. So if those requirements are clear, then it will be clear for designers to implement, and similarly for the development team, based on the designs, the development team will develop their product. And here in these different phases, like unfortunately we can't really see the total product. We can only visualize the product, like how it is built, only after at the end of completion of the maintenance phase. We can't really know whether we are going in a right direction. Like we don't have any prototype basically with this kind of model. So it is quite hard to know whether we are going in a right direction, and only at the deployment phase, then you try to know, oh okay, it doesn't work now. So then if it doesn't work, then again we need to go back to the place where we need to again restart everything, go to the requirements and see where we have missed it and all those stuff. So this is one of the difficulty, and here the documentation part plays a vital role. With this documentation, then it will be clear for everyone. The majorly the projects are failure. The reason for the projects is if the persons involved in the project have some assumptions. So if there are assumptions, then it won't work good for the project. So everything needs to be clear, then only the project outcome will be good. And we have a other model, agile model. We'll look into the next slide. Coming to the agile model. So in agile means like it's kind of flexible. So it's basically flexible to changes. If you look into the sequential model, it's not really flexible. The main part there is every step depends on the previous step, but whereas coming to agile, it's a iterative, which means like whenever there is a new change, you can adapt, you can actually easily to adapt to the change and then work on your project. So it, and in Agile there is like two frameworks or like methods we can say in Agile. Those are like Scrum and Kanban, and here we'll discuss about Scrum. Scrum is something like, in basically in Agile you break down the whole process into small processes and then you work on them. For example, if you are planning to deliver a project in a year, then you try to break down the entire requirements into a small bunch of pieces, like we make sure that we want to deliver, have some requirements to be completed in a month, and then you plan your activities accordingly. Similarly, coming to Scrum, and in Scrum you have like a small teams, you work as a small teams and they are like cross functional, which means like you can have team members who are working on development, and you can take members from testing, and even you can have a requirement engineer there in the same team. And then so basically you work in a cross functional manner, and these teams work like in sprints, which means like sprint is nothing but you take like a bunch of requirements which needs to be done in a particular time. For example, the sprints can be like in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks, and sprint has a goal, and you have a designated persons for the Scrum, like the person who handles the Scrum is Scrum Master, and you have a product owner. Basically how it works is the product owner will be prioritizing the task, like in the 1 month, when we discussed in our example for a 1 month thing task, he prioritized the task in the product backlog, and then he tries to set the priorities on the each task, and then the Scrum Master, he looks in, he takes the task from product backlog into the sprint backlog, and he tries to set some priorities there as well for the team, and then he tries to start a Scrum, and he can keep the Scrum to 2 weeks or to the kind of 4 weeks also to the maximum, which works best for the teams. So generally 2 weeks the sprint should be good, and then once he starts the sprint, then there is no like, if any other change comes from the outside, then we don't really change the way of working until unless it is very high prior where the product owner wants this to be done. Only then the sprint can be closed, but even the sprint closure will be done by the product owner. And in general we try in Scrum, basically everyone has their own tasks to do, and they have a set of goals to reach for everyone, like to complete these allocated tasks in time, that is in the 2 weeks of time. And once after this particular sprint is done, they do their retrospectives. In retrospectives, it means like they try to see like what went well for them, what did not go well for them, and whether there are like any improvements for the team to be done in a way for the upcoming sprint. And then they also do some sprint planning for the upcoming next sprint, like they can try to discuss and see, yeah, maybe if we can make these as priority or something, and they can be done in the sprint planning meetings. Yeah, so once the sprint retrospective is done, then the Scrum Master makes some points like what needs to be done, improved, and he takes some actions as well, and the team works on them in the next sprints. And if some tasks are not performed, then they try to discuss in the retrospectives, and then they try to see if they need to carry forward into the next sprint or like how to handle them basically. And we have other similar thing like in agile way of working, Kanban, and we will look into that in the upcoming slide. Kanban, this is also a agile model where here is in sprint you have a kind of uh, here in Kanban also you have teams, but they are not like any designated roles assigned in Kanban. And if you can see, in Kanban board is basically used to visualize the project progress in a better way, which means like it has some fields, like as you can see in the presentation, to do, in progress, or testing, or done. So these are like different columns where depending upon the project they can actually set up these columns according to their own wish. Like some can make it like requirements or testing, or like depending upon how they feel good about visualizing the project progress basically. And in this we can see work in progress is limited, which means like for example, if you see to do, they have like 2 tasks there on the board. They set to be limiting the number of tasks an individual should perform, so that the more the productivity will be present, and the more focus the person who is handling the task will have. If there is no limit on a particular on the columns they have, for example, they can set to 4 or 2 as well, for depending upon how focused they want to be while they are working. So if they don't have this limit on that particular thing, then one can actually assign himself so many tasks, like 10 or 11, but he might not have a good focus on all the tasks. So that's why it is important in Kanban based and to have this limit of having the task on the board. So, and if you don't have that, the other problem is when you run into problem, you just keep on the task there for so long there, and that is not really good for the project. We don't know the bottlenecks and what is the blocking problem, and then this is how can be visualized by this board. And the other thing is like when you are stuck as well, the good part of agile, of course in waterfall also you can take support from your colleagues, but in waterfall they have like requirement phase. There should be a subject expert in requirements, and in testing phase you have subject expert in testing. That is very crucial in waterfall model. And to get support it might be very tough, but in agile, as it's a cross functional, you try to collaborate with the developers and get your problem solved. If the tester is going into some assumptions, then he can know, he can stop the work and try to discuss with the developer and see he can get a clear picture on the requirement if he's feeling some uncertainty about it or something. So basically the people in this team can help out with each other, and then and try to reach the goal they set. And this can be cross functional as well as if the development wants their own kind of Kanban board to see their development progress, then they can have one for them. And for testing team, if they want one, they can have one for them. Basically this Kanban is really good in visualizing the project progress on a bigger picture. And this is a pull basis, means like there is no kind of pressure from a project manager or someone like to do this task or to perform this. It's like the members in the team can actually pull a task from the backlog or like from the stories, like the ones to do, and try to keep a progress, try to work with them. So that's why it's mentioned as pull basis, like you can pull the task and work on that without any problems. Yeah. And we and in the next slide we'll look into the DevOps. Yeah, so now we look into DevOps. DevOps is a set of practices that combines software development and IT operations. That means developers, development and operations basically. And in DevOps, if you look into this like infinity symbol, there the different steps are like planning, coding, building, testing, releasing, deploying, operations, and then monitor, and again go for the planning. So it's a kind of a closed loop where you have the feedback coming after deployment or so. So in DevOps, basically it is used like it is needed for a continuous improvement and for continuous development. And DevOps is basically used to reduce the gap between the developers and operations. That's what the DevOps is for. And if it is comes to reducing gaps between the customer and the developers, we can follow the agile way of doing, and the DevOps is used to bridge the gap between the developers and operations. If you look into a bigger picture, why DevOps is really famous these days, most of the companies spend the kind of budget on the project mostly on the operations side, which means you have more problems in the operations. When it comes to development may take like budget of 20%, whereas operations itself takes like a 80%. That is say shocking figures, but that is the reality. This is basically because while we are deploying and trying to use the project or something, then you find to see so many bugs. For example, maybe the server is not compatible, or there is like a downtime in operations, and so to fix those, basically the budget goes more into that. And in order to reduce that, DevOps is the one which actually helps in that matters. And if you see into it closely, the process is kind of same, and here you have more of tools in DevOps. That's why the subject experts are really needed, and the individuals who are working in these teams should have a good understanding about the tools on which they work. For example, after planning, when you code, then it's like so many developers work on the same thing, so you use Git there, so that for the better version control, the Git will be useful. And then to build, you have some automated build tools like Maven, so you do some automating building there. And then you have this Selenium and JUnit, which are used for testing. You do some scripting to test it automatically, rather than doing a manual work every time to whenever to test the same requirement or something. You try to do some automation with Selenium or JUnit or with the Python also, depending upon the language you have it and how compatible is your code to test with it. You do select some automation test tools, and then coming to release, you have this Jenkins, where Jenkins server you can try to see, you can run it overnight. You need not rerun the code and build it every time manually and test it. Do some test runs like nightly test runs to say like everything is under control. So you can try to run as many times and see if it is passing, how stable is your code, and how stable are your test cases you developed. So those all things can be done in Jenkins. So basically here, by adapting to these tools and all, it actually saves a lot of time for you, which means you before going to the deployment and operations stage, you actually know the problems and the stability issues here. And for deployment as well, you have this Docker, AWS, which is quite of really famous now, and you have for the operations, you have Chef, Ansible, and I'm really not sure about the other tools, but you have kind of lots of tools. And for monitoring also you have some Splunk and Datadog. So these are used for some monitoring, and based upon the monitored results, then you get some feedbacks from the operations teams to the development teams or to the customer. And then this is a kind of a loop which goes on with the improvements, and then again the planning goes, and again the same task goes on. So basically this is like, if you see, it's a continuous improvement, and there's a continuous development, and the subject matter expertise is quite really needed in this to perform DevOps. And now let's look into the interesting one, like which project methodologies are best for you as a project manager to select. I will see them in the next slide. Yes, now the interesting part is which project management methodology is best for you to select and for your team. And there is no right or wrong answer. It depends all on your team scenario and your team competency and the level of expertise you have on the project, and also your past experiences as well. And that's why there is nothing as like this model is really the best model for you or like for your project. And that's why I have mentioned like few factors which needs to be considered while selecting your project management methodologies. Those are like depending upon your cost and budget, and if you have so much of budget with you, then definitely you can go for waterfall model, and if there is some problem then you can go and fix it because you have a budget or something. But this is how it is, like and if you have good budget, then you also can go for DevOps. You can invest some things into the tools to buy and then to try to make a best out of it. Basically you can see what can happen in deployment with these different automation tools around. So one should actually consider how much budget and how much it is costing, those things, and also the team size. Depending upon the team size and also their competence levels, this is also one of the factor which plays a quite a major role. Even if you don't have a competent team to work with it, then working in DevOps is kind of a tough task. And so that's the reason you need to look into different aspects when it comes to selecting a project methodologies, and coming to ability to take risks, so which is nothing but how you want to take risk and be responsible for those, which means like in waterfall, if you want to follow waterfall model in your project, then it means you're taking a risk like everything is going to be fine in each phase, which may not be the case at the end. So it depends upon, you need to have to take these risks and try to select a model. And you also need to look into the flexibility, whether if you have a concurrent requirements to work with and you know what you're going to get out of these, then I think you need to look into the particular for example, if you know what to do and you know everything about it, you know that you don't have any upcoming changes, then definitely you need to go to waterfall model. And if you think like you're going to get so many changes in future, then I think you need to go for agile and see and try to see if the requirements are very vague or something, maybe Kanban helps. And if you think like the requirements are kind of 80 to 80% fine, then maybe you can go for Scrum and work on there, because in Scrum you have a specific goal, and and it needs some priorities as well. So depending upon that, you can try to select whichever framework works best for you. And also, yes, the other thing is timelines. You can't just keep on working on a project for years and years. So definitely depending upon your timelines, you need to select your models. Yes, the other important is like client and stakeholder, or like stakeholder collaboration. You need to have a better check on how the customer really wants as well, like in which thing he is really comfortable. Maybe some customers, they wants to be Kanban to visualize the project progress, and yeah, so depending upon the client's requirements as well, you should actually consider a better model. Yes. So this is how you select your best project management methods. and I have just mentioned some differences where I have gone through while preparing these slides or the presentation. So these are here. Thank you. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening to me.